Maybe other things came up on the calendar. So, okay.
Few more joining. I'll keep an eye on the room.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Today we are here to talk about what you do and why. And we have coordinator meetings coming up next week. And so we were taking a look at some of that data. And the data that we'll share with you today is between October, because that's when version one was released, right? October was the first submission deadline, and mid-December that we'll be sharing with you, looking at both the CalAPA, CalTPA information. So, Julie, you want to pull up the PowerPoint?
Yes, here we go.
All right. So, what you do and why? Reflecting on practice. Let's go ahead and take a look at our. So again, we do have CalTPA. If you're looking at green documents, you're looking at multiple subjects, single subjects, world language. Purple is for the PK3 credential and ECE, and we recognize that PK3 and multiple subjects overlap, but they are separate credentials, and so they are separate performance assessments with separate teacher performance assessments or expectations, apologies. Then we do have the Education Specialist Cal TPA. There are 5 different versions of the Education Specialist Cal TPA: mild moderate support needs, extensive support needs, early childhood special education, visual impairments, and deaf, hard of hearing. And then there's the CalAPA with their 3 individual cycles for candidates seeking a preliminary administrative credential. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So today we're going to do some introductions, talk about some norms and outcomes for this afternoon. We're going to be reviewing some Cal APA, TPA, and Ed Specialist theory of action, looking at some trends in the data, and then we have some announcements and save the dates so you can mark your calendars. Go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so the Cal PA, so performance assessment, Cal PA support team. We have our director, Juliet Waltleitner. She is, again, the director of Division of Research, Data, and Assessment. And you all have noticed, perhaps, that there have been some renaming going along in the commission, different divisions, branches. So we are in the Educator Quality branch. Used to be Professional Services Division. Now it's the Educator Quality Branch. It is made up of DREA, which is the Division of Research, Data, and Assessment. And then there's DSAWI, and I don't know exactly what that all stands for, but Workforce Investment is at the end. And so that's what was PSD folks, the folks that do the accreditation site visits. So we're a branch within, we have divisions within this branch, and things have been a little bit shifted around and organized in that way. My name is Marissa Luna Lopez. I'm a consultant here with the Performance Assessment Development Team, supporting both Cal TPA, Education Specialist Cal TPA, and also Cal APA. Joined here by 2 of our other consultants. Julie, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll introduce our newest friend on the team.
Yeah, welcome everyone. My name's Julie Holmes. I'm the other consultant, one of the other consultants on the performance assessment team, and I'm supporting the Cal TPA and Ed Specialist Cal TPA math cycle, as well as cycle 1 for single subject and world language. And I'll pass it to Patricia.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patricia Lane, and I'm the newest consultant to the team. This is probably what, my 9th day? I've lost track, but it's my 2nd week. So I'm happy to be here with all of you.
All right. We also have our contractor, our evaluation systems of Pearson team. Some of you may be familiar with Dr. Reginald Nichols, or Reggie, as he is affectionately known by many. And then Dr. Webb, Xavier Webb, and he's a senior area director. So there are a lot of things that we do, right? So performance assessment guides, rubrics, developing templates, and then there are things that these folks do. So if you have questions about Results Analyzer, things about the website, my candidate went to register and they're not able to do so on the website, that is the ES folks. And so we have their contact information as well for you, but wanted to let you know there's, kind of the two sides of what we do, given that we receive thousands of submissions a year, and the ES folks are contracted with CTC to score and deliver those score results. We can go ahead and, if you would mind, if you could, in the chat, please sign in your name, position, your institution, and that way we can see who's in the room. And while we're doing that, we can probably pop over to the next slide. So if you could keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking. It's helpful if your camera is on, but we also recognize that some folks are eating lunch or tuning in after lunch and, cameras off, perfectly fine. The chat feature, please pose questions related to the current topic. We don't want to jump ahead and or ask questions too candidate specific. We will stay on afterwards if you have any specific questions. We want to avoid multitasking to make sure you hear things. We are going, like I said, we're going to be looking at some data, and you don't want to be looking at something and then look up and be like, wait, what? Did I miss something? It's important to, be able to hear all the information. And we want to honor time for all by moderating participation and be able to ensure that everyone is able to ask questions and participate. And we're a small group, so feel free to either raise your hand or put your name, a question in the chat, and we can answer as we go along. Marga.
I'm not able to, I type something in the chat, but it won't submit.
Huh. Strange. We'll
Anybody
take a
else?
look and see
I'm not
what's
seeing
going
anybody
on.
else's stuff in the chat either.
Oh, you're not seeing chat at all.
No, I just see it's blank.
Huh. Maybe you need to maybe leave and come back, because I'm seeing other chats from other folks, and sometimes
Oh, hmm.
these odd duck things happen. So if you want to leave and come
Okay.
back, we'll readmit you. We're just going through some of that front matter.
Alrighty. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and let's talk about the outcome. Today, we're going to review fall version 1 data trends and discuss how faculty and mentors can support candidates. So what we have for you today is a preview of what we'll show at the coordinator meetings by looking at what the trends are in the data, where candidates are scoring well, where candidates are, dropping off, and areas of concern. And then we'll be looking at those specific rubrics and talking through some of the constructs to make sure that everyone understands, and getting some feedback from you all, some information from you all about ways that you support candidates in these spaces. So that way, the best ideas in education are often ones that we find from one another. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So the Cal APA structure and overview. And we will be talking about both Cal APA and Cal TPA, and we'll be talking about EdSped and Cal TPA general education. And so we'll be moving between them. So leadership cycle 1, analyzing data to inform school improvement and promote equity. Leadership cycle 2, facilitating communities of practice, and leadership cycle 3, supporting teacher growth. And for those of you that are very familiar with these cycles, I apologize for explaining them, but cycle 1 is really an opportunity for a new or aspiring administrator to look at data, both quantitative and qualitative, to address and to identify and to do some research around an equity issue at their school site. Within cycle 2, facilitating a community of practice, this is an opportunity for an aspiring administrator to then potentially take the equity issue they identified in cycle 1 or a different equity issue and bring together a group of people to talk about and work through and implement some intervention to try to mitigate that equity issue. So a group of second grade teachers give the district writing assessment and notice that a specific group of children in across their classes are all needing additional support in one aspect or another. So putting into an, having that meeting, coming together, reviewing the data, coming up with an intervention, and then putting it in place and tracking the data. What are we seeing? Is this effective? Is it not? And facilitating that space. Oftentimes teachers are part of those, but facilitating, as you well know, is a very different role. And so it's a good opportunity for candidates to engage with an equity issue in that way. And then leadership cycle 3 is coaching. The candidate would find a teacher and coach them in their classroom based on the CSTPs. And so Cal APA is in version 8. And as we move into next year, it'll go into version 9. So we'll be looking at some of the data there. Go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, Julie.
Okay. All right, thank you. So let's, again, as Marissa said, apologies if you already know this, but let's talk real quick about the structure and what you're seeing this year for the MPA and cycle 1, and I'll have Marissa talk about the LPA and cycle 2. So the CalTPA multiple subjects and PK3 ECSE MPA, or MPA stands for the Math Performance Assessment. So in that certain assessment, they're learning about their students and they are planning a math lesson. So it's really designed to see how candidates are planning, teaching, and assessing, reflecting, and applying on that one math lesson for a group of students. A group is 2 or more, and as well as 3 focused students, because want to see how they are differentiating their instruction and planning adaptations based on what they know about their students. So this cycle really emphasizes asset-based instruction. What do we know about our students? What are their assets? Whether they're cultural, linguistic, they might be an interest. So based on what we know, we're planning based on the students' assets because we've gotten to know our students really, really well. They're also developing that academic language so that the students can access the math instruction. They are focused on higher order thinking in the multiple subjects, and in the PK3, the focus is on play-based learning. And for either one, they are focused on higher order thinking skills. So there's just that really deep, having that deep understanding of their students in order to plan that math lesson and use math reasoning in meaningful ways with their students. And as for cycle 1, for single subject and world language, it is very similar to the MPA, but in this cycle, the single subject or world language candidate is planning that one content specific lesson, again, based on assets, learning needs, UDL principles, higher order thinking, all the ways to really deeply know their students, and then build upon that in order to reach them. And Marissa, if you want to go over LPA in cycle 2.
Sure. So with SB 488 and the sunset of RICA, which many of you might still be dealing with, candidates that are hanging out, dealing with other things for literacy. But the LPA was a direct result of that Senate bill, SB 488. And this is now a combination of what was cycle 2, assessment-driven instruction, and the literacy performance assessment. So the LPA is assessment-driven literacy instruction, where a candidate is going to use assessment data to teach a group of students, 2 or more, and they have to teach them foundational reading skills and an additional theme in a direct, systematic, and explicit way. And then the candidate is going to use both formative and summative assessments to be able to make a data-driven decision as to what students know well and what they potentially may need additional support with, and do some follow-up instruction in their cycle. So in their reflect and apply. And for cycle 2, because there is no specific literacy requirement in for single subjects and world language, the cycle 2 continued to focus on assessment-driven instruction, but took a lot of the things that we learned out of the field test for the literacy performance assessment and applied them in the way that made sense for these candidates. And instead of focusing on the literacy components, they focus on deep learning of their subject matter. And so with cycle one, cycle two, MPA, LPA, they are all addressing the teacher performance expectations of these individual credentials. And there are some pretty big differences now between what was before, where single subject and multiple subject candidates could be in the same space, just domain specific work. But now there's enough difference where it's a challenge sometimes to keep them in the same space. And so we have done our best to kind of help divide them out so that way candidates and faculty and other folks can understand some of these key differences. All right.
All right, so the Ed Specialist CalTPA, the structure and the overview. Again, this is the 4 steps, just like in the CalTPA. This represents the 5 SPED credential areas because now all 5 Ed Specialist credential areas are required to complete a performance assessment. So they have the math performance assessment, they have the literacy performance assessment, and regardless of their setting, candidates who are completing the Ed Specialist CalTPA must complete with students who have an IEP. So again, they have the 4 steps. And I just wanted to make clear, and I didn't make this clear in the other slide about the state standards because it does straddle. For if they're in a pre-K or TK setting, they are using the Preschool Transitional Kindergarten Learning Foundations, the PTKLF, and kinder and above is using the California Common Core Standards for math. But in addition, Ed specialists can also use the core content connectors for students who might have that on their IEP, and they need those special adaptations. So that is designed for students who can access that alternative curriculum. So just like in the other MPA, they're designing this one math lesson for their group, plus the focus student or focus students. It depends on the credential area for that MPA that they're completing. And they are providing that math instruction, creating those learning adaptations for their students, and focus again on higher order thinking skills and UDL principles and formative assessment as well, and monitoring learning. So I'll pass it to you, Marissa.
And for the literacy performance assessment, it's very much so the same task that we're asking of the CalTPA in a general education setting. The big difference is that it is not developmentally appropriate to engage children under the age of, I believe it's either 3 or 4. I'd have to really look at the individual guides. But for some it's 3, for some it's 4, with some of the literacy tasks that were outlined in SB 488. And so the candidate would plan using that recent data. They would teach, they would monitor and assess, and then they'd reflect and apply, and then again teach that follow-up instruction. And so I did see a question in the chat about education specialist candidates working with any grade level. That is correct. Many education specialists are tasked with working with multiple grades. When I was teaching students with extensive support needs, I taught middle school, 6th through 8th grade kids, but sometimes they would give me a 5th grader if it made more sense, or I'd keep a 9th grader for an extra year because of the parent choice. So there was a range of ages and grade levels of the students in my classroom. But some resource teachers are very specific for one grade level, and so it just very much so depends on the placement of the candidate. And what's more important is the ages of the children or students that are in the classroom that they are working with. So even adult transition program, ATP students, all of that information is in each of the individual guides. I believe it's like page 5, or the Roman numeral V in the front of each guide, that says what age the lowest age of the students that they can work with, and then the highest is 22, as that is the age range of students, the top age range. But again, each credential authorizes something just a little bit different. So you may have a birth to 22 authorization for some credentials, whereas you may have an age, TK authorization through, ATP. So it really depends on the individual credential. So do take a look at that page V. I believe it's on the front of each of the individual guides.
Yeah, you're right. It's very early on.
All right, so some Cal APA data trends. And the red arrow is the section that we're going to talk about today. So taking a look, so what was done is all of the administrator performance assessments that have been submitted in this academic year with version 8. For APA folks, you guys got your stuff back in August, like you're going to get your stuff this year, you TPA folks. This was August to about mid-December. That's when the data was cut off. And so the average scores are listed for each rubric here. And the green boxes were the high points, and the red boxes were the areas of concern. And so for APA Cycle 1, we'll be taking a look at Step 4, Rubric 8 today. For Cycle 2, there's a lot of variation in that cycle, and so we actually will be taking a look at Reflect step there as well. I recognize that the 2.4s were in step 2 plan, but as far as what we're doing here today, we'll be talking about step 4 Reflect, which was a 2.5. And then taking a look at cycle 3, looks like candidates are soaring pretty well on average here. And we'll be looking at step 4 rubric 6 in this space. Or were we looking at step 5, act 5? It's either 5 or 6. I might have put and that's why we give the PowerPoint out at the end so we can fix all those things. But we'll be taking a look at either rubric 5 or rubric 6 in this space. But again, this is a preview of some of the data that we will be diving into much deeper in the coordinator meetings, and the registration for coordinator meetings is in the EQ Weekly if you're interested in a much deeper dive into this data. All right, so 1.8, and I know that this is itty bitty, teeny tiny, and I'm so sorry. It's just a huge rubric. There's a lot of different constructs here, and sometimes that can account for a lower candidate score because they not only have to meet, one construct or two. I mean, there's 4 constructs in this rubric that a candidate would have to meet. So the essential question here is, how does the candidate reflect on and analyze what they have learned about equity-driven leadership in cycle 1? And they need to cite evidence in step 1, in step 2, or in step 3. They don't have to cite evidence from all 3 steps, but they have to cite evidence, and it needs to be clear that they cite that evidence. And how, based on school context, they might address that single equity gap for a group of students at that school. Then, how do they reflect on their own strengths? Who am I? What am I strong in? And where do I need to grow as an equity-driven leader? And for some candidates, this is the very first time that they've ever really looked at an equity issue. And it's a shock to candidates sometimes to look at the data and to identify a trend, and that it's one group of students that are in their class, that are in their school, and they may even be part of the group themselves and not recognize that there is some kind of equity access issue that's around those students. So that's what the whole cycle 1 is to do, is to really get into the data, to look at quantitative data, to look at qualitative data, to have conversations with administrators and other educational partners and people in their district to have that conversation. So they need to very clearly explain their rationale for selecting the supervisor or educational leader to provide feedback. So in this cycle, the candidate really should be talking a lot with their administration. Now, the word supervisor is a new word for this year, and that was included to be more inclusive of ECE settings. So people can be in ECE settings and complete their Cal APA. There's no issue with being in an ECE setting and getting an administrative credential as long as they have the prerequisite credentials, right? So that's what that supervisor component was, and we'll make sure to more clearly define that for the upcoming year. Then they need to reflect on their own growth as an equity-driven leader and discuss their ability to address equity needs. Now, this might be an opportunity for some of them to say, yeah, I was really shocked at this. I did not think that this was what our campus looked like. I did not understand that this one group of students or this group of students or a subset of students were performing at a different rate than their peers. And it was shocking to me. I was surprised. I didn't really realize it, and I also recognize that I might be part of the issue.
Sorry, I think it kicked me out for a minute.
Oh,
Sorry about that.
problem.
Small little glitch.
Do you have the slide deck? Thank you.
Great.
And that the candidate reflects and then they clearly explain their current strengths and then identify future areas for growth. And we already talked about that they share relevant evidence from different steps to clearly describe. Now, Sherry.
Okay, this is really new for me. So I have a question. When when we look at this rubric, is the essential question, are those questions in the template? I'm not understanding. Okay, I know that like the rubrics go with like the template. This one goes with the reflect and I understand like the constructs and the and the ors, but where are they responding to this information in terms of the templates that they're completing? I'm trying to find the connection between the rubric and is it between the rubric and the templates that they're doing?
So the rubrics are used to score the whatever evidence is identified for that rubric. So looking at and Julie, I'm gonna just, if it's okay, I'm gonna share my screen real quick.
Okay.
So let me see here. All right, I guess can we replace current share? Let me just pull up just the template for this one here. So let me see here. So you're going to provide, the candidate would provide their rationale for educational partner feedback they chose. So that goes to the first construct in that rubric. Then they're going to summarize what they've learned about equity-driven leadership. How does understanding the institution and our structural factors that may be contributing to equity gaps influence one's ability? And so in looking at that one, that's going to some of the next sets of construct. Then based on your assessment of your strengths and areas for growth as an equity-driven leader, analyze how you address equity needs for the identified group. And so that goes to, and without knowing, looking at it, I think it's the fourth construct. And then based on your analysis of your experience in cycle one, identify specific learning goals. So the essential question is like the overarching question to help focus the candidate, and then the template helps to guide the candidate through to be able to have the evidence be clearly identifiable.
Okay, so there's four questions here. It doesn't necessarily mean number one goes with the first construct, number two to the second. It's
Correct.
just, so really essentially when we're teaching our students to do this, they should have the template open along with the rubric and then making sure that they have answered everything that's in the rubric somewhere in this template. Am I understanding that
Absolutely.
correctly? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And one thing that and Julie, if you wouldn't mind, I'll stop sharing. We can put the rubric back up. Um, if you are working with candidates and having them work through their templates, I used to have my candidates actually take their notes on one set of templates and then complete their materials on another. So that way they were doing that during class and things to keep in mind when answering some of these questions. But even turning in some of these as much as possible into a question or helping them to identify, okay, so if this says candidate clearly explains their rationale, where is that? Is it clear? Do you understand it when they say, how did I do this in this space? Because what an assessor does when they go is they look at that level three, right? That meets the CAPE, right? And so they look at that level three and they say, this is where I found this. And they take kind of like a screenshot and put it into a folder that goes with this rubric. And what they will do is they go through and they look at this and they identify and they find one piece of evidence. If they find one piece of evidence for a level three, then that meets that construct. And then they go through, and once they find that one piece of evidence, they go on to the next construct and then look for that piece of evidence, take a screenshot of it, put it aside, take a screenshot of it, put it aside, take a screen. And if they say everything in a level three is met, good to go. Let's take a look at a level four. Does their reflection demonstrate how the school context, including social, economic, and cultural context, impacts their approach to providing this equity-driven leadership? So that might not be a specific prompt, but if they have met everything in a level three, now where could that go? Where could we talk about the school's context, the social, economic, or cultural context? Is there something that we can expand upon in one of these responses that can get you to a level four? And then, right, because a level three, that's a strike, right? A level two, it's a ball, and a level one, it's just me throwing the ball. It goes straight down. So that's terrible. But a level four, right? That's above, right? Because a level three is meets the expectation. A level four is above the expectation, and a level five is above and beyond the expectation. So if we meet everything for a three, we've met the cape. If we are on a level four, right, we're above. And then a level five, they utilize experiences from steps one, two, and three in confronting equity issues and gaps to describe what leadership skills have been learned and how these skills may be used in the future. So they would use the template and include those pieces as they move forward. So the essential question is a way to get everyone to focus. The essential questions are broken up into the constructs, excuse me, and then the constructs help to guide what questions or prompts are on the templates. Does that?
Yeah, that helps. I wasn't understanding how this rubric tied into the template. I've been working on annotating uh all of this and having that information so they understand it. But I think too, it might be a good idea just to explain to students to kind of start off with what the construct is asking and then start that off in your sentence. So to make sure they're hitting all of those points. Um, you know, my rationale for selecting, just using this verbiage in that beginning that paragraph on somewhere in there so that as the assessor reads it they see, oh yeah, they've met that. Okay, I understand. Thank you so
No,
much
for sure.
for
And we
that
had a program coordinator that works with the education specialists programs. He actually went through templates and helped write some sentence starters for his candidates. And that was Riverside County Office of Ed. And they made some really nice, and there's no problem with that. You're not giving them an answer, right? You're just helping them to focus because oftentimes a candidate's going to look at a rubric like this, and even all of us did like, it's like really long, and that's a lot of words, and I got a lot of stuff to do tomorrow, and my kid's got to be at baseball, and there's a lot of things going on. And so by a math teacher, I probably said this before for some of you, but he used to tell me inch by inch math is a cinch. And so anything that you can do to help break some of these constructs up, break them down, talk about what they look like in real life, what they look like in your context. Every one of you is in a different part of the state, is in a different part, different district. And if you're able to help the candidates see that in their life, then what's more, culturally responsive than that? And so that's the role of faculty. And so we want to make sure that we are supporting you by making sure that these are clear and understandable and that we see how they flow through. And we will be, I think it's going to be in this week's EQ branch. We are going to be asking for some feedback from the field for both CalTPA and CalAPA as we venture forth into this brand new world and make some updates for version 9 for CalAPA and version 2 for CalTPA. And so anything that you can provide us in feedback will be helpful. Those survey links will be available in the EQ weekly, but yeah. All right. Sorry. just want to make sure. Okay, let's go ahead. Anything else, Sherry, before we move on to the next rubric? Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, so taking a look at 2.7, cycle 2, always the space where folks struggle. And candidates have a lot of misconceptions and such, and we've done a lot of changes in this cycle. And I was pleased when I looked at some of the data, and especially when we looked at the number of condition codes and how significantly they've fallen. Right now, a candidate receives a condition code for cycles 2 and 3 for some very specific reasons. If they are staged, scripted. Someone makes a script and says, hey, everybody, let's play like we're having this meeting, and goes through the meeting. It's staged. And sometimes we see them so much that they're reading the script and then they turn the page and continue to read the script. It's, sometimes it's that bad. So, and then the other condition code that candidates are receiving in this one is just incomplete submissions. They need to have all the minutes, they need to have their agendas, they need to have all their templates, videos need to be viewable, and videos need to show the candidates facilitating a group. And I know that they are able to edit videos now, but they should not edit them so much so that it looks like an interview, and then an interview, and then an interview with a different person that they're talking to in their community. There needs to be a conversation. It needs to be a community of practice. And so if the candidate is not able to be seen to facilitate a group, then they would score lower. And if it's because of edits, then that could be a concern. So as you are working with candidates and telling them about edits, the purpose of the edit is to allow them to skip over things that don't necessarily meet the expectation of the video or of the rubric. It's really to push through some pieces that are not as key and allow the candidate to really showcase their facilitation skills. So taking a look at this one, this is the candidate reflect on their initial implementation results and feedback from the group to analyze their leadership skills and practices and make connections to their areas of growth and identify next steps. And this often can be a bit of a challenge to reflect on what someone says about you and your leadership skills. And we are very open and welcome to, feedback from folks about some of the sessions that we've put on over the course of the year. And here I'm going to cough again. Get that out, not have you all hear it. And then, but yeah, I listened to that Buzz Latham is a poem when I was graduating from high school, and he said there, because if you can figure out how to take criticism and it not hurt your feelings, tell me how. And it stings a little bit when somebody doesn't tell you the most awesome person in the whole wide world, but it's important to have conversations because no one will grow. People grow from a space of being, with trust and comfort. And but also I worked with my dissertation chair and I trusted her and she told me things that I didn't necessarily like because they felt icky. But you know what? She was right after I thought about it and I worked on it, and I became a better person in my work, and I, graduated. So it was all good. So that's what these candidates are having to do in this space, is thoughtfully reflect on their implementation results and their leadership skills. They need to cite specific appropriate evidence from their steps to support their reflections, and then they need to clearly and consistently demonstrate how their leadership practice equitably facilitated that community of practice. All right. Let's take a look at, and are there any questions here? All right. Let's go ahead and take a look at 3.6. And in cycle 3, as you saw in the data, candidates are doing pretty well. And there's a lot of different reasons why, but we're seeing some pretty consistent high scores across cycle 3. So this is the candidate, again, analyzing their capacity to conduct a CST-focused coaching and observation process. So just like in cycle 2, this is where the candidate is doing some self-assessment and they're looking at those CSDPs and how are they able to coach someone else? How are they able to help someone else? And for some candidates, this is the very first opportunity to be able to provide feedback to another teacher about their practice based on the CSDP. And everyone had a very different experience with induction, depending upon, the program that you went through, the mentorship that you received. And it's an opportunity for a candidate to go through those steps from the side of the mentor. And sometimes it's icky to have that conversation when you have to talk about someone's spaces for growth, especially if a candidate is coaching another teacher that's in the classroom next to them, or a friend, and they have to say, what they see as strong with the CSTP, and then they have to identify areas for growth. And it's a challenge for new teachers to do this. And like I said, it feels icky sometimes. When you ever have to do those performance assessment reviews of folks, it's a challenge. But again, they need to reflect upon and cite evidence of how they facilitated and maintained that coaching partnership, that that trust amongst the group. Any questions here or any suggestions here? All right, well, thank you for taking a look at these rubrics a little bit more deeply for CalAPA. Let's go ahead and take a look at some CalTPA trends and data.
Okay, for CalTPA, so we've just recently got this information as of like Friday. This is exciting stuff. So this data represents from this past October through December. So a few submission windows. This is all version 1 information. So for CalTPA, and don't worry, Ed Specialists, we have slides for you too. So for CalTPA, looking at cycle 1 for single subject world language, and we have the math performance assessment for multiple subjects in PK3. You can see the number of candidates who submitted and received scores. And then you'll see at the top, there are 8 rubrics 1 through 8. And then we have it sectioned off by step 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can really, at a glance, see the bright spots in green. Those are the highest mean scored rubrics. And then in red, the lowest for that credential area. So looking at single subject, an N of 833 candidates. So for rubrics 1 and 6 had the highest mean score. And again, that we're looking for 3 and above. 3 meets the TPEs. We start scoring at level 3. We're looking for 3 and higher. So they did really well on those 2 rubrics. And then there sort of maybe areas of concern or growth areas would be the 3rd and 4th rubric in planning. And that is Focus Student 2 and Focus Student 3 there. For the world language candidates, again, looking at the 5th rubric and is being the lower area and the higher area being the 7th rubric in reflection. And then for multiple subjects, 1,171 candidates. So this is some great data. And so their higher scoring rubric areas would be in 1 and 5 with a mean average of 2.8. And again, we're looking for 3 or higher as the meeting the TPEs. So this is good, but could be improved. and then the lowest scoring rubric there for multiple subjects being step 4 apply as with a 2.3, which is interesting to me. And I think we can unpack this a little bit when we get to these couple slides in a second. And then for PK3, and we had 15 because this is a relatively new credential area. So 15 submissions with a higher scoring area for that 5th rubric in teaching and assessing, a 3.5. That's very well done, PK3. And then an area of growth being that last rubric in step 4. So I have a little red arrow for cycle 1 and MPA. We're going to discuss in the next slide around rubric 1.8 in the apply stage. And Marissa?
All right, and cycle 2 and LPA, taking a look at some areas that are, where candidates are scoring 3 or above. And again, remembering that the passing score is 16, so a candidate who scored 16 or 2 across all 8 rubrics would meet the minimum passing score. And it is a new test, so new performance assessment this year, so that's part of the supportive passing standard. And so we will be talking about for step 2 and rubric 2.6, specifically around that actionable feedback that candidates are providing to their students. But we probably need to move along at a perky pace because we're at 1:45 and we still have to get through. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And yes, we will be sending out the slide deck after the presentation, so you will have access to all this.
The recording does take a couple days, but we do put it on our YouTube channel and we announce it in the EQ branch news. So again, coming back to cycle 1 and MPA, let's talk about that final rubric in step 4 apply. So again, this is a screenshot of the multiple subjects, the last rubric in apply. Again, scoring starts at level 3. This is where your candidates should be focused on. This is, I don't know if maybe they're running out of steam. I don't know if it is maybe, let's talk about some of the language and the constructs. Maybe they're not clearly describing their future steps, or maybe they haven't thought through those. So let's kind of look at level 3 real quick and raise your hand or put in the chat what you think might be happening here with multiple subjects. And again, PK3 is really hard to say because there are only, of course, 15 submissions. But in level 3, they're applying what they've learned throughout this whole math cycle, throughout their planning stage, their teaching and assessing, throughout their reflection. They're thinking about all of that. And then they make a decision and they describe those future steps for math instruction for their group and their 3 focus students. So what are those future steps to this? What is the next step for these kids for this math instruction? Is it to go back and to reteach? Is it to hone in on a certain section? Is it to teach it in a different way? What is that next step in their rationale? So showing and showcasing how they've thought through that. And then the next construct in level 3, they're just clearly being a key word here, not vaguely, not minimally, clearly describing future steps for instruction that are going to advance the students' learning of the math content and the math practice and the academic language development. So those big 3 concepts. So they're really clearly thinking through all of that and describing future steps. And then they are referring back to evidence. So they're going back to their planning, their teaching, their reflection, and they're pulling something from that as they go back and they make those connections. Somewhere along the way, they need to think through evidence or connection that apply to that step. Like, oh, I realized when I was planning this that I didn't account for this or that. And so that's something that they can mention in this step 4 application of next steps. Because we never plan the perfect lesson. I certainly have never done that. And so it's good to go back and make that connection. Like I thought this would work and it didn't. But moving forward, I'm going to try this or that. And so we just really want to see that they're making those connections. And encourage your candidates to be vulnerable. They don't, admitting that they forgot something in a planning stage or when they were teaching and they might have, confused them on this one part because they explained it in a weird way. That's okay. That's okay to do. I know, I'm sure I can say that we've all done that in teaching. And so this is just pulling from just prior evidence that something in their planning, teaching, or reflection. So again, looking back at that mean score data, candidates are not hitting this level 3. They're in the level 2 range. And the level 2 range, if you look at the words, it's an attempt, it's minimal, it's vague, it's not clear. So that, I think, is a really big point that you can really strengthen with your candidates when you go in and observe them and you do an observation and you're sitting afterwards and you're having that debrief. Bring up some of these questions for application for next steps. Like, what are your next steps now that you've finished teaching this lesson? Um, what did you learn? What do you wish you could do differently? That's really basically referring back to evidence in your teaching. What describe to me your next steps for how your students are going to progress in this math. Are you going to go back and reteach, or what are you going to do different? So I really think that there's a really practical use for this step, and bringing that into embedding that into that field work practice would be really strong. So I don't know. Anyone else have ideas, or they can certainly put something in the chat if they have an idea around why this area might be a point of struggle for candidates.
I think the biggest catch for this is just making sure students understand how to apply these prompts. I think that might be part of the disconnect. And I know Marissa, in her deep dive, one of the things that I'm doing this semester in my class is we're going to spend time on these rubrics, and we're going to look at what a level 2 would look like, what a level 5 would look like, and just really becoming acclimated and fluent with how to understand the rubric, what it's asking you, and just having those conversations. I think that could be part of the disconnect, because multiple subject scores weren't that high. I mean, we were barely hitting the threes in MPA. And ironically, I would have thought that it would have been lower with LPA simply because it's new, and but those scores were better. So I'm going to spend time just making sure students understand these different levels of the constructs, and the ands and the ors, and understanding what it's asking them to do. I think that's part of a problem.
Great. Yes. Pay attention to the ands and the and/ors, because you'll see the ands in level 3. It's this, this, and this. And at level 2 might be this, and or this. So they can have 1, 2, or all 3. And so that will bring a candidate down. The language is so important in the constructs, but it is all there. And if you're looking at level 3, like Marissa mentioned, flip it to a question. How did you apply what you've learned throughout the math cycle, and blah, blah, blah. And put them in peer groups. If you're having faculty one-on-one discussions, there's lots, I think, of some ways to really bring this into the coursework so that they're making those connections. Maybe when they're working on this late at night and they're reading the construct and they're like, I don't know, it's not connecting for them. And so having that larger conversation with their peers is really going to develop this application of next steps, because we don't want the learning to just stop. Nope, unit done, lesson done. We're never, I'll never come back to that. I don't need to think about next steps because we're moving on to this. But we do as educators. So this is an important step. Any other thoughts before we move on? Okay. All right, let's look at single subject. Cycle 1. This is almost identical to the MPA, but instead of a math lesson, they are doing their own content-specific lesson depending on the content credential area that they're seeking. Art, music, agriculture, business, science. Doesn't matter. I think there's like 20 of them. They're inputting their content-specific lesson. So you'll see the language is very much the same. They're applying what they've learned for their group and for their 3 focus students. They are describing those future steps, and they're referring back to previous evidence. Any thoughts or questions about single subject candidates? All right, and I will move on to LPA.
All right, so taking a look at the LPA and how, I actually have a couple of theories myself about why candidates might score higher in literacy than they do in math, especially multiple subjects. I think as a group, and this is just Marissa talking, not, not the blue background, but I think that as a group, elementary school teachers tend to be more on the literacy side, not necessarily on the math side. And so perhaps that's something they bring with them as saying, I'm not a math person. I'm happy I only teach second grade because I can only do this kind of math. But where everybody could be a wonderful math person, and it's just a matter of applying yourself. But that might be, you know, that might be part of it. That mindset, like we're saying here, of the math versus the literacy. And when you think you're good at something, you tend to be better at it, right? Because it's all about what you think. So I don't know. And as someone who struggled in school and math their whole life and avoided every math class I could ever avoid, and took every literacy one that I could, it would be true of me as well. So just me thinking. But so taking a look at rubric 2.6, teach and assess, the level 3 construct here. So how does that candidate use assessment results to provide specific actionable feedback? Great job, kid. Awesome. Time to go line up for lunch, right? Specific actionable feedback. What does that really even mean? And so often kids, I see candidates walk around and give high fives. Yeah, it was great. The kid doesn't know what they did well. They didn't get a specific actionable feedback. Specific, I know what I did well. Actionable, how I can move forward, right? So I remember talking about this in a class one day with some candidates, and I brought stickers that were gold stars, and they had, materials out on their desk, and every time anybody answered a question correct, I put a gold star on their paper, and they were like, they go, I know that you're talking about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, but seeing a gold star next to my name felt really good. And I was laughing with candidates because but I said, but when I handed them their gold star, I told them exactly why. That response was really, key. I could tell you read the text and interpreted in that way, here you go, gold star. And the takeaway that they had was if they're getting something but not necessarily knowing, it doesn't have as much value. And so the biggest thing here is that candidates need to provide that specific actionable feedback. What is specific? How can they move forward? I saw your paragraph. You really did a great job of including capitals at the beginning and marks at the end. And I noticed, because we've been talking about proper nouns, that you made sure to capitalize every one of these proper nouns. So what do you do when a noun is not proper? What do you think we do with that? Okay, well, there's some specific actionable feedback, things to move forward. Are there any other circumstances where we would capitalize a word in a sentence? Right? So that's what the candidates need to move forward with, and they are just a lot of them are just so happy when the kids or the students are just doing what they're supposed to do, that they're just like, oh goodness gracious, my video is going to come out so nice. But what we need to capture is why. And a lot of times, candidates have a hard time with this because they are just so used to great job, kid, high five, up top, this, that. So making sure that they are, creating that specific actionable feedback and or discussing what was done well and or misconceptions or gaps in literacy and language development. So it's not just what they did well or didn't or need to work on, it's for literacy and language. So this is bringing in both the ELA and the ELD. So how we're supporting language and how and the way that sometimes I talk about it to make sense to me, because some candidates can say, well, the ELA and the ELD look so alike, right? The ELA, the literacy is what we're learning. The ELD is the way we communicate about it and how you support candidates in communicating about it. Now, the great idea of creating a sentence frame or a stem for a candidate, that's supporting their language development, right? That's making sure that they're using key terms and phrases in their response. When I taught third grade, I used to have the students take part of the question and put it into their response. So they could practice using that key vocabulary. And anytime that a candidate is able to support their literacy and language development is going to move students and children forward. Let's take a look at the next because again, this one is pretty darn similar, but again, we're not working with that literacy component. It's content specific. But in cycle 2, before, if you were around in version 7 and before, ELD was assessed in cycle 1 for CalTPA, and cycle 2 focused on academic language, or you just didn't have to include English language development. It could be just academic language. But now cycle 2 is the space where ELD is assessed. So in this space, the candidate is using assessment results to provide specific actionable feedback. Now, in lower grades, many times specific actionable feedback may be the teacher having an individual conference with an individual child or a small group and giving them feedback. Candidates will need to capture that in some way, but oftentimes with older students, they may even write out some specific actionable feedback. Maybe they had some type of a rubric that they're using to score a summative assessment, or they're scoring a formative assessment. However, then they would provide specific actionable feedback there. This right here, so that's part of the next step. This right here is the candidate is using assessment results to provide specific actionable feedback to clarify what was done well. This is going to be in video clips. So this needs to be something that they say. This needs to be something that's captured and not necessarily just written in commentary, because assessors have been trained that they need to see in video what is corroborated in commentary. So a candidate might say, "Great job, high five, kid," and then write in their commentary, "I gave a high five to this kid because he did a really nice job responding to the prompt," and then right, that's the specific feedback, right? That might be the specific actionable piece, but we didn't see it in the video, so they can't get credit for it. But if they say, "Hey, high five, great job, you did a really nice job responding to that prompt, and I can tell that you are focused on this and you know what we're doing," right? That's something specific. That's something that they're moving forward with. Actionable, maybe, we can keep moving forward. But so that might be a part. I don't know. Like I said, we're looking at this data. It's a new performance assessment. We're trying to figure out kind of what's happening here. But in this rubric, the evidence is the video clips and the commentary. And so if we don't see it, and if it's not corroborated in commentary, they won't get credit for it. Whereas in the next step, right, the specific actionable feedback is based on the summative assessment. That could be something that's written out, a separate video, things of that nature. So that's what we're looking at in this section. So any questions here? Any thoughts? All right. Well, I think we're ready to move on to the next section.
Okay. All right, Ed Specialists. So again, this data is from version 1. This is from October to this past December. So we now have our 5 SPED areas. So for mild moderate support needs, we had an N of 248 submissions. For extensive support needs, 106. Early childhood special education, we had 10. And no submissions for math for DHH, deaf, hard of hearing, as well as visual impairments. So in looking at this first table, again, 8 rubrics, you will notice this table is a little bit different than the other table, than the CalTPA, because any rubric that had a mean score of 3 or above is highlighted in green. So you will notice all of the greens just signify that it's 3.0 or better. And then in red is the lowest scoring means average for that credential area. So mild, moderate, some 4 of their rubrics were over 3. 3.0, 3.2, 3. That's great scores. And then the lowest scoring rubric was in the very first rubric in planning, a 2.7. For extensive support needs, I also had the same lowest scoring rubric. So we are going to focus on that today and look at that deeply and talk about that very first rubric in planning. And then all of the rest of their rubrics for extensive support needs had a mean average of 3 or higher. So that's really, really fantastic. Early childhood special education had we circle them twice if they're the same. So just an area of growth would be rubric 1.2. That's that very first focus student. And then that last step in application of next steps. And their highest area was in step 2 in teaching, 3 or higher. So the scores are really, really impressive, especially around teaching and assessing and reflection. So this is really some great data. Marissa, for LPA?
Sure, taking a look at the LPA and the reason you're seeing probably no submissions for DHH and VI, they're very new to the world of performance assessment, having only required a performance assessment after July 1, 2025. But there may be some candidates, as you see in the LPA, that there were 5 DHH candidates that completed the LPA because this is now, they had the option of foundations of reading, the literacy performance assessment, or the RECA up until the end of October. And so folks may have said, you know what, I really think that this literacy performance assessment will be the best way to showcase my knowledge, skills, and ability, but I'm not required to complete the math performance assessment because I started program before July 1, 2025. And so there will be a little bit of an imbalance in what performance assessment candidates are completing. And many times, education specialist candidates are in 2-year programs, so they may have a different map as to how they're completing their program. But taking a look at scores, as Julie was saying, candidates are doing pretty well in taking a look at the numbers of at least 2s, because again, if they got a 2 straight across, they met the minimum requirement. And 3s are better, and we're seeing a significant numbers of 3s and 4s as mean scores. So, and that's new this year. We haven't really seen 4s and, upwards of 4 as a mean score for candidates. But the end is important to take a look at, that we have some data with one candidate or something of that nature, it'll be different when there's 1,000. So let's go ahead and take a look at the MPA.
All right, so looking at the Ed Specialist, CalTPAA, MPA, this is the mild moderate. This was the rubric area that they were scoring lower on, I think in the 2.7, 2.6 range. I think I skipped ahead. Here we go. So again, let's start with level 3. I know that there's a lot in this very first rubric because so much is going into their planning. They are selecting their state standards, including math and a math practice and a math content and writing those learning goals. They are more than likely maybe teaching a combo class, and maybe there's confusion around selecting state standards. So we will set the record straight. If a candidate is teaching in a combo class, let's take, for example, 4th through 6th graders. They do not have to pick 4th, 5th, and 6th grade standards. They need to select one state standard based on the student population that they're teaching. So if they're teaching 4th through 6th graders and the candidate has gotten to know these children very deeply and feels as though using the 5th grade standards would be in the best interest of this population of students, then they can use that as their basis for the rest of the MPA. So it's important that they develop those grade level standards, those learning goals for math practice and content. Don't forget one without the other. They go hand in hand together. They must be together, because if they do not have the math practice, but they have the content, then they're going to go down to a level 2. A level 2, you'll notice the and or between content and or practice. They have one, but not both. So it's very important that they have their grade level standards, that they have their content and the practice learning goal, and the next construct in level 3, that they have their academic language learning goal. That they've thought through this. We give examples in the guide so that they're thinking through that what academic language is really going to help my students, because I know them the best, right? I've gotten to know my students the best. What's really going to help them access this information? And we want it aligned. Of course, we don't want an academic language goal about something that is not about the content and the practice of the math instruction that they're learning. Um, and how are they creating that safe, positive learning environment? Helping, that is helping students progress in the math content and the practice and the academic language that they're learning. Leveraging the students' assets. I don't know. We've seen great improvement over the years in this area. But again, leveraging students' assets, whether they're cultural, whether they're linguistic, whether that's an interest. What do you know about these kids, about your group, about your focus students? What do you know about them that's really going to help you tap into what they do really well or what they're really interested in to help them improve in this math area? So really important to really help your candidates really tap into that. Um, so planning those math activities that are going to engage their students in that age and or developmentally appropriate higher order thinking. So very important to build higher order thinking into your coursework and be looking and thinking and talking about that level of engagement. What does that look like? How can I do that as a teacher? How do I interact with that? That's probably a very um, you know, hard first step for a candidate. So giving them case studies, giving them examples and ways to think through that. And then talking about monitoring learning. How do you know? How do you know they're learning? Are you are you observing? Are you doing little hand gestures? What are they doing? How do you know? And what's their plan for how they're going to know that their students are learning? So this is really just touching in that formative assessment, whereas the LPA really dives into that summative assessment. And then finally, that their lesson is clearly describing how they're going to collaborate with and or facilitate instructional support personnel to support students' access. So this is also a key concept for the Ed Specialist CalTPA. An instructional support personnel could be a paraprofessional, it could be a speech language pathologist, it could be the gen ed teacher that you're co-teaching with, it could be any number of, of instructional personnel that are there to support the learning for these kids.
Any
Would
qualified adult. That's what we
any
call them. Any
qualified,
qualified adult. The cooperating teacher if they're a student teacher. So
they're
yeah.
a qualified adult.
Mhm.
So they are helping to support. And then because it's important for our ed specialists to also give direction to their instructional support personnel. I'm going to do this. You're going to be doing this. We're doing these things together because we're helping and we're collaborating and we're working to, support students learning in math. So it's very important to really dive into this concept as well. So I'm not sure. Again, I'd love to hear from you, the field, if you think that there's an area maybe where you've seen your candidate struggle in this particular rubric. Um, Maybe you have some ideas about support or things that you might be doing in your program that are helpful to your candidates, kind of uh, with the Ed Specialist Cal TPA specifically. Okay. Well, something to think about, and we'd love to hear from you because we want so much feedback on this. As Marissa mentioned, and I'm just going to come bring it back. We're sending out a survey. I believe it goes out this Friday, and we want to hear from TPA coordinators, program faculty, mentor teachers, we want to hear from anyone who's interacted with any of the version 1 assessments this year. We want your feedback on each one of the steps. And so there is room for text where you can go into depth and tell us more about things that are working or not working, and things that you've noticed with the new versions. Okay, so I will move on, but please flag me down if you think of something. All right, Marissa?
All right, so taking a look at the LPA for MMSN, rubric 2.3, this is again in teach and assess. So this is the part where your evidence are the 1 to 4 video clips up to 20 minutes, and the commentary can either be written or verbal ASL commentary. So and what that looks like is different for a lot of different candidates. We've seen some candidates just come on and speak to camera. We've had a program coordinator or some other qualified adult reading a prompt to a candidate, and then the candidate responds to it. What we don't necessarily want is someone that just writes out exactly what they would have written and just reads it to the camera. That could be a little bit challenging. So it's really that verbal or ASL commentary is that opportunity to speak to something rather than writing, especially for someone. There are folks out there that are just not the strongest. They don't come across as strongly in writing as they do, but you talk to them and you're like, wow, okay, yeah, now I understand. And so that's what that piece of commentary is. But we're taking a look at how they provide instruction in the selected foundational reading skill and use direct and explicit approach to actively engage students and support their progress. Now, there was a comment in the chat about making sure that the candidates are reading the footnotes at the bottom of the rubrics. Thank you so very much. We try our best to put them right there. So that way a candidate can say a foundational reading skill. What does that mean? And then they have to look into it. No, 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 we don't want to do that. These are the items, and assessors appreciate having things right there on the rubrics as well. So they're not flipping through materials, but print concepts, letters of the alphabet, phonological awareness, all of these pieces, those are those foundational reading skills that assessors are looking for when they're checking out that first construct. And as many of our program faculty and friends have said, if you think a candidate knows what foundational reading skills are, teach them again. Make sure, because it's a challenge for some folks. And I personally, when I was educated in the 80s, when I was in elementary school, it was a very different time, and I did not learn sight sound correspondences. We learned whole language. We learned a bunch of sight words and had to figure things out. And when I was studying to be an education specialist, I had a class, and the first thing that professor did was go through all the sounds of different phonemes with us. And I was so surprised that I didn't know some phonemes and that many of my classmates didn't necessarily know phonemes. And when I was an instructional coach, I would go into elementary classrooms, TK through second grade, and hear teachers teaching phonemes incorrectly because of what sounds they think that letters make. So it's important to not take for granted that these candidates are in graduate school and that they would know their phonemes. They may not necessarily know them. So teaching them explicitly what those are and what each of these components are, not assuming that anyone knows any of those. So that way, and people might be ashamed to ask what some of these pieces are because they think they should know it, right? I shouldn't be in grad school. I shouldn't be in a fifth year credentialing program. I shouldn't be in college and not know this stuff, but it's a reality for a lot of folks. And for folks who come to this space, perhaps even as an English learner, and still are challenged by the phonemes in English and what it sounds like, and still make words sound like I don't know. I just make sure that you're not taking for granted that candidates know these things. And so, and explicitly teaching them and then teaching it again, because it's going to be a challenge. And then that they clearly explain why, right? So whenever you see a rubric construct where it says they clearly explain why, they need to teach it. They need to actually do it and have it be caught on video. And then when they get to that commentary, it's not a summary. They're not describing, I put the kids at the table and I passed out the papers and then we started talking. We can see that in the video, right? We absolutely can see exactly what they're doing. They don't need to give us a blow by blow, but they need to tell us why. What was the reasoning behind the instruction that they provided? And actively engaging students, that can be challenging, right? Because for one person, active engagement means one thing or another. And to me, active engagement means that the learners are doing something, right? So if a candidate is just talking at a student and they're just, and I know that it's challenging within it with an education specialist environment for what active engagement looks like, but this is something that the candidate can provide information on in their contextual information. However, this child or student communicates, however they engage, they make sure that they are doing that, and the student needs to be engaging with the material in the best way that they can within their modalities. Any questions or ideas on this one as to why? And I personally, I think sometimes that it's the active engagement. Um, we see a lot of very direct and explicit approaches, but it's that active engagement. Are the kids actively engaged? Are the learners actively engaged? All right. Let's go ahead and we have just a few closing announcements. I'll turn it back over to Julie.
Yes, we got through all the data. I'm very excited. It was very exciting for us to put that together and share that out with you. We want to be really transparent about the data. I hope that was helpful. Again, this recording will be coming out soon. As soon as our IT department can put it up on the YouTube channel, we'll make that announcement. So we want to call your attention to, oh, and my little annotation here.
It's okay.
Gosh, I don't know how to get rid of that now. I was playing with annotations. I think we're just going to have to live with it for the rest of the webinar. Sorry. Um, Live and learn. All right, I want to call your attention to our Meredith Fellows Implementation Conference. It's coming up next month, February 5th and 6th. We call it MFIC. And MFIC is not our presentations, it's your presentation. So it's programs, it's county offices, it's school districts, it's people and programs that are implementing the CalTPA, the EdSped CalTPA, the CalAPA, the EdTPA, and we even have people coming from FAST. So we'll have lots of different workshops all around the California performance assessments. And we hope that you will attend. These are great. I think they're like, 80-minute workshops. This is completely free. And it's something that we proudly put on each year because we want to highlight and give you all the space to present what's working in your program and what's working with your candidates and share it with the field. Let's share information widely. So this is really something exciting for us to put on. The theme this year is data-driven decision-making, leveraging data to improve practice. And we'll put the link to register in the chat. Maybe somebody could grab that. And next, we have some upcoming webinars. As Marissa talked about, coordinator meetings, your program coordinator at your site, they should be your liaison. They should be the one attending this meeting next week. We have TPA on Tuesday, the 20th, APA on Wednesday, the 21st, and Ed Specialist Cal TPA on Thursday, the 22nd. This is the first year that we are breaking up Cal TPA and Ed Specialist Cal TPA for their own coordinator meetings because we have all of the 5 areas now participating with the performance assessment. So we're excited about that. And then, of course, these Digging Deeper webinars. We will not have one in February due to the Meredith Fellows Conference, but we will have another one in March where we'll focus on equity, focused teaching, and leadership. And then in April, we will focus on embedding the CalAPA and CalTPA. And think about your planning for the next year, version 2, or if you're APA version 9. Again, I'm so sorry about this.
No, you got some
July.
instructions on the chat about how to clear. What does it
Oh,
say? It
thank you.
says
Let me look
there's
at
an
the chat.
annotation menu on the side that includes a garbage can that
Thank
will
you.
clear previous markings.
Oh,
Do you see it?
okay. Clear all drawings. Oh, thank you. Thank you, whoever put that in.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Ah, you're wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. And next, let's keep going because we've got some program information. I know many of you know how to reach us, but again, this is how we contact your program coordinators. They're in our ADS system. So we got to keep that data clean and updated. So if a program coordinator leaves at your site or changes roles and you get a new coordinator, they need to update this in the data system. So they can email annualdatasystem@ctc.ca.gov for support, or they can read that link on how to add or change, the contact in the ADS system. We have email listservs that we pull from. So CalAPA, we have a CalTPA and an Ed Specialist CalTPA listserv. So please, if you haven't subscribed, do so now. We will, of course, send out these links with the recording. We have our program office hours for you guys every 2 weeks or every other week. It's the first and third Friday of the month from 9 to 10. We have a full hour. It's Marissa and I and Patricia there. So you get to pop in open house style and ask us a question, or just sit there and learn from your colleagues and talk to one another. And we have candidate office hours every week, every Wednesday. We just hosted them last night. We had some great conversations with candidates. Those are every Wednesday from 4:15 to 5. And then
And
we
those are
have,
for both Cal TPA and Cal APA. So those of you that are supporting candidates at the Cal APA, you are more than welcome to send them to our office hours. We will split them off into different rooms and answer questions.
we'll do what we need to do to help them. And then we have a monthly leadership professional learning community, our PLCs, and that's the second Friday of each month. So we will be having one in February.
Yes, and apologies, we had two scheduling conflicts with December and January, and so we didn't have those meetings, but we will be resuming in February. And they've been really great spaces to be in community together.
We actually really look forward to that. It's just a time where we can all chat and you can also talk to each other and learn from one another. And finally, we want to thank you so much for your attendance today, your participation. If you have any questions about the performance assessment, the Cal APA, the Cal TPA, or the EdSped Cal TPA, here are those email addresses. Want to call out your attention to the CTC website. We have recently revised and updated that, so I want to put that in the chat as well because I want you to bookmark it. If you forget a Zoom link or you're like, I forget when office hours are or candidate office hours Zoom links, where can I access that? It's all right here, I promise. It's not hidden, so please bookmark that. And then if you have technical questions for our contractor evaluation systems, there is their website as well. So we just want to thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for attending. Have a great day. I hope this data was useful to you all.
Were you going to put that in the chat, the CTC website?
Yes, let's see.
Thanks.
You're
If
also going to
Lisa or
send out,
Patricia could grab that, that would be great.
you're going to send this out too as well, this PowerPoint.
Yes.
We
Okay.
have to send it over to IT. IT does their magic.
That's
and
fine
then
because
put it
I'm
up
going
on
to
the
need to
website.
go into a couple of those links to make sure that I'm on the the right website lists or whatever.
Right.